In the year 2045, democracy had taken a twist that would boggle the minds of any history teacher. Gone were the days of dull ballots and tedious debates. Instead, citizens could hop into sleek, chrome time machines and traipse back to the past to cast their votes for historical candidates. It was a wild concept, one that made Ben Carter, an average office worker with a penchant for video games and takeout, snicker at the absurdity of it all. On a particularly dreary Tuesday, Ben found himself in line at the local polling station, which, in his case, felt more like a sci-fi amusement park than a democratic institution. A large digital screen flashed various slogans: "Make your vote count, even if it's a century late." Next to it, a holographic version of Abraham Lincoln gave a thumbs up while wearing a "Vote for Me" hat that seemed utterly ridiculous. Ben shuffled his feet, his mind racing. He had only decided to come after a coworker had boasted about how he could vote for his favorite historical figure. Ben had thought, why not? "This is going to be a hoot," he muttered to himself, glancing at the eccentric folks around him. One man was dressed like George Washington, complete with a powdered wig, and a woman beside him wore a suffragette sash that read, "I voted, in 1920. Finally, it was his turn. Ben stepped up to the counter, where a cheery attendant greeted him. "Welcome. Who would you like to vote for today?" Ben blinked, his mind racing through a mental catalog of presidents. He remembered reading about some candidates online. Can I vote for Taft?" he asked, thinking back to the comically large president famous for his love of donuts. "Of course. Just step into the time capsule over there," she said, pointing to a shiny pod that looked like something out of a low-budget sci-fi flick. Ben grinned as he climbed in. What could go wrong? He was about to influence history. With the press of a button, he felt the familiar lurch of time travel and suddenly found himself standing in a whirlwind of color and noise. As he stumbled out of the machine, he quickly realized he wasn't in 1908, but 1920, a chaotic year filled with political rallies, raucous crowds, and a surging tide of change. He looked around, bewildered. Everywhere he turned, people were waving banners, shouting slogans, and fervently debating issues he barely understood. "Who's this clown?" a burly man shouted, eyeing Ben suspiciously as he stood there in his casual t-shirt and jeans, utterly out of place. "Hey, I'm just here to vote." Ben stammered, but it only drew more attention. He was swept into a gathering crowd, surrounded by impassioned speeches and boisterous cheers. That's when he spotted her, Margaret Maggie Reynolds, a fierce suffragette, rallying women with a fire that lit up the entire square. She stood on a makeshift platform, her fists raised in the air as she spoke about equality and justice, her words ringing with conviction. Ben, however, was too busy marveling at her passion to notice how close he was standing to the platform. When he tripped over his own feet, he landed right at her feet, drawing the crowd's attention. "Look. A modern-day man who can't even stand up for himself," Maggie exclaimed, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Are you here to join the fight or just to trip over your own opinions?" A ripple of laughter spread through the crowd, and Ben felt the heat rise to his cheeks. I'm just here to vote for Taft," he blurted out, and the crowd erupted into a cacophony of laughter mixed with confusion. Maggie's eyebrows shot up. "You've come all the way from the future to vote for Taft? You must be joking." Ben stammered, but before he could finish, he was whisked into the rally. As Maggie debated passionately about the importance of women's suffrage, Ben found himself bumbling along, attempting to contribute to the dialogue. He discovered that his modern-day knowledge made him an unlikely ally. Despite his blunders, he became an accidental celebrity among the suffragettes, drawing laughter and gasps with his clueless but endearing insights. Days turned into a whirlwind of rallies, speeches, and comical misunderstandings. Maggie and Ben formed a tenuous alliance. She would give him history lessons on the fly, and in return, he introduced her to the concept of social media, which she found both baffling and exhilarating. "Imagine if we had a Twitter," she exclaimed one afternoon, her eyes alight with the possibilities. "We could reach thousands with a single message." Ben grinned. "Yeah, and your hashtag could be suffrage for all. It's catchy." The two quickly became a team, navigating the tumultuous waters of 1920s politics while Ben simultaneously tried to avoid any further time travel blunders. Yet, despite their efforts, the election seemed to go sideways. Each time Ben attempted to correct something, like shifting Maggie's speech to include more modern ideas, things only got more chaotic. Then came the day of the big rally. Ben, now somewhat of a local celebrity, was convinced he could save the day. He arranged for an epic showdown between himself and none other than Teddy Roosevelt, who had somehow found his way into this time. Roosevelt, sporting his iconic mustache and spectacles, stood on a podium, looking as fierce as ever. "Who dares to challenge me?" Roosevelt bellowed, his eyes scanning the crowd for his opponent. Ben, caught up in the moment, raised his hand. "I do." The crowd gasped. Maggie, standing nearby, face-bombed. "What are you doing?" she hissed. "I don't know. I thought it would be funny." Ben replied, his heart racing. And so, in front of an excited crowd, the debate began, a clash of modern wit and early 20th century bravado. Ben, with his offbeat humor and absurd anecdotes, faced off against Roosevelt, whose booming voice and fervent speeches filled the air with nostalgia. The exchange was an uproarious affair. Ben spoke of how people could use social media to discuss issues instead of shouting over one another. Roosevelt countered with impassioned pleas for strength and traditional values, insisting that America needed a leader who embodied the spirit of adventure. As the debate escalated into a humorous brawl of ideas, Ben accidentally mentioned Taft's infamous love for donuts, which led to an impromptu discussion about food policies. The crowd roared with laughter, caught between historical reverence and the sheer absurdity of the moment. Just when things were at their peak of hilarity, the time machine, now a topic of whispered rumors among the crowd, malfunctioned. A brilliant flash erupted, and Ben felt himself yanked back into the machine, leaving the crowd in stunned silence. When he landed back in 2045, the transition was jarring. Gone were the cheers and chaos of 1920, replaced by the sterile glow of the modern polling station. Ben looked around, disoriented. "Did I change anything?" he murmured to himself, half hoping he had left some mark on history. To his astonishment, the digital screen in front of him now displayed headlines about the recent election. Apparently, the discussion sparked by his time-traveling antics had set off a political wave. Women's rights activists were gaining traction, with references to the Ben and Maggie effect. Ben chuckled, realizing he had unwittingly influenced the future. With a mix of pride and disbelief, he stepped outside to a world buzzing with discussions about candidates who hadn't been in the limelight before. As he walked down the street, he overheard people discussing candidates he had never even thought about voting for, but the real twist came as he sat down with a coffee, contemplating his time travel escapades. A flyer fluttered down from a nearby lamppost, advertising the next election. "Vote for your favorite historical candidate, time travel returns," it read. Ben couldn't help but laugh. "Well, this should be interesting," he said aloud, envisioning a future where he might just end up running for office himself, armed with history lessons from a determined suffragette and the humor to keep it all light-hearted. with that thought, he took a sip of his coffee, already brimming with ideas about how to make his mark, one absurd vote at a time. As Ben sat in the cafe, sipping his coffee and contemplating the absurdity of it all, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was on the brink of something bigger than himself. The idea of time travel had opened up a realm of possibilities, not just for him, but for the entire electoral process. Imagine the campaign slogans: vote for your past, change your future. He chuckled at the thought that he pulled out his phone, scrolling through social media, half expecting to see people discussing the latest cat videos. Instead, the feed was flooded with hashtags like time travel votes and Magianben 2026. It seemed the time he'd spent in the past had sparked a curiosity about history and its influence on contemporary politics. People were suddenly interested in candidates they had never thought about: Taft, Roosevelt, even lesser-known figures. It was as if the past had come alive, prompting everyone to reconsider who should lead them. Inspired, Ben decided to harness this momentum. He could be the bridge between past and present, the guy who used a little bit of humor and history to make politics engaging. He rushed home, fired up his laptop, and began drafting a blog post titled, "Why Voting for a Historical Candidate Might Just Save Us." He envisioned anecdotes from his time in 1920, adding quirky commentary on modern-day political issues. As he typed, ideas flowed. He wrote about Maggie and her fierce dedication to women's rights, how her spirit could motivate a new generation of voters. He discussed Roosevelt's unyielding energy and Taft's unexpected charm, contrasting it with the blandness of some contemporary candidates. By the time he finished, he had a rough draft that felt fresh and exciting. Once he hit publish, he shared it across all his social media platforms, fully aware that it could either go viral or sink like a stone. He leaned back in his chair, anxious but hopeful. It wasn't long before notifications began popping up, each one fueling his excitement. People were commenting, sharing, and debating. The hashtag Magianben 2026 started trending within hours. The next day, as Ben strolled through the park, he noticed groups of people gathered, engaged in spirited discussions about politics, history, and what it meant to be an engaged citizen. He felt a surge of pride, knowing that he had played a small part in igniting this conversation. People were no longer just scrolling past political posts, they were participating, sharing ideas, and even planning local meetups to discuss how to incorporate historical lessons into their current political landscape. Suddenly, he was approached by a young woman holding a clipboard, her enthusiasm palpable. "Excuse me. Are you Ben Carter? The guy from that blog post?" "That's me," he replied, a mix of curiosity and excitement. "I'm Lucy. I'm part of a grassroots organization focused on voter education and engagement. Your article has inspired us. We want to hold a town hall to discuss these historical figures and how their policies could impact our current elections. Would you consider speaking at it?" Ben blinked, taken aback. "Me? Speak at a town hall? Absolutely. We think your perspective could really resonate with younger voters. We're trying to make history fun and relatable." His heart raced. Speaking at a town hall? It was one thing to write about politics from the comfort of his home, but standing in front of a crowd? The idea both thrilled and terrified him. "Sure, I'd love to," he finally said, surprising even himself. In the days leading up to the town hall, Ben immersed himself in research, revisiting history books and articles about the candidates he had accidentally championed. He crafted his speech, determined to mix humor with serious insights, making the past feel relevant and engaging. The night of the town hall arrived, and Ben stood nervously at the front of a packed room. The energy was electric. People of all ages filled the seats, their eyes bright with curiosity. Lucy introduced him, and he took a deep breath, stepping up to the microphone. "Hello everyone. I'm Ben, and yes, I'm that guy who accidentally time-traveled back to 1920 and came back with a lot of opinions," he began, eliciting laughter. "I mean, who knew political rallies could be so chaotic? I thought I'd just cast a vote for Taft and maybe grab a donut, but instead, I got swept up in a suffragette rally." He continued, weaving in stories about Maggie and the absurdity of Roosevelt's bravado, making connections to modern issues. He spoke about the importance of understanding history to make informed decisions today, all the while keeping the atmosphere light and engaging. As he spoke, he noticed faces lighting up, laughter ringing through the room, and the audience nodding along, truly engaged. He concluded with a call to action: let's not just remember our history, let's learn from it. Each of us has the power to shape the future. Let's make sure our voices are heard. The applause was thunderous, and he felt a wave of relief and excitement wash over him. Afterward, people approached him, eager to discuss their thoughts, share their own historical interests, and brainstorm ways to get involved. Ben found himself surrounded by passionate individuals who wanted to keep the conversation going. Weeks passed, and the movement grew. Inspired by his town hall, Lucy and the team organized a series of events around the city, inviting speakers to discuss different historical figures and their relevance today. Ben found himself at the center of this whirlwind, a reluctant spokesperson for a new generation of politically active citizens. As the upcoming election approached, excitement buzzed in the air. People were not just voting, they were engaging, debating, and learning from the past. Local schools incorporated history lessons into their curriculum with a focus on how it could inform contemporary issues. Ben received countless messages from young people who felt empowered to vote for the first time. One afternoon, while setting up for a community debate, Ben received a text from Lucy. "Hey, we've just been invited to present our movement at a national conference on civic engagement. They want us to share our ideas about merging history and modern politics." His heart raced again. This was it, an opportunity to take their grassroots movement to the next level. He quickly typed back, "Count me in. Let's show them what we've got." The day of the conference arrived, and Ben stood at the podium, flanked by Lucy and a diverse panel of speakers who shared their insights. As he spoke to a crowd that spanned generations, he felt a sense of purpose wash over him. He shared stories of Maggie and Taft, of the laughter and chaos that had led him here, and the importance of remembering the past as they moved forward into the future. Together, we can create a political landscape that honors our history while embracing change, he concluded, his voice steady and confident. The response was overwhelmingly positive. People approached him afterward, excited about the potential of merging historical lessons with modern political engagement. "Your story resonates," one attendee said. "We need more of this." Days turned into weeks, and as the election drew near, Ben's life became a whirlwind of activity. He found himself invited to speak at schools, community centers, and even local radio shows. He became somewhat of a local celebrity, known not just for his accidental time travel but for his passion for engaging citizens in meaningful discussions about democracy. On election night, the air was electric. Ben gathered with friends and fellow activists, their collective energy buzzing as they awaited the results. When the first polls closed and the projections came in, they erupted in cheers. The candidates they had advocated for, those whose histories they had revived, were making significant gains. As the night progressed, the excitement grew. It wasn't just about winning, it was about the movement they had ignited. People were participating in politics like never before, encouraged by the historical lessons they had rediscovered. The future felt bright and full of possibilities. In the aftermath of the election, Ben reflected on how far he had come. He had started as an ordinary office worker, yet through a bizarre twist of fate, he had become a catalyst for change. He smiled at the thought of all the people who had joined the conversation, fueled by the past and eager to shape the future. One afternoon, as he sat in his favorite cafe, he noticed a young couple animatedly discussing candidates and historical figures, their enthusiasm palpable. A sense of pride swelled in him. This was what he had hoped for, a renewed interest in history, a drive to engage in the democratic process. And then, as he looked out the window, he spotted a familiar face, the holographic Abraham Lincoln from the polling station, now on a poster urging people to vote for your future. It seemed history, in all its forms, was very much alive, and Ben felt a rush of gratitude for the journey he had taken. As he raised his coffee cup in a silent toast to the past and the future, he couldn't help but wonder where this path would lead next. With a grin, he pulled out his phone, already brainstorming ideas for another blog post, perhaps this one titled, "Why Time Travel Should Be Mandatory for Voters." In that moment, Ben realized that the journey was far from over. History, after all, was a continuous conversation, and he was more than ready to keep it going. And so, with laughter and a sense of purpose, Ben stepped into his future, ready to influence, inspire, and make his mark, one vote at a time.